Hello YouTubers, Joe Kersey here on Wednesday, January 14th, 2015 at 1500 in the afternoon Eastern Time. Now today's little sally into potentially the reality of the absurd, or the absurdity of reality, depending on how you look at it, it was prompted by a fellow that I email back and forth with and so forth and so on. He apparently one of his great nieces or great nephews is having a fairly extensive, well, it's not all that, it's, well, from a medical standpoint, it's not, well, yeah, it's extensive. What happened is this child, some years back, had a dermoid cyst. Well, people call dermoid cyst by many names, you know, sebaceous cyst, Wens, and it was on the back of his neck, right up here by the base of his skull, or the individual's skull. The gender was unclear to me. And so it was excised. Then after a number of years it came back, and eroded in to the back of the lower part of the skull, such that it's now, while presumably still encapsulated, these things aren't necessarily invasive in the sense of malignantly invasive. They're, they tend to stay encapsulated, but they can cause trouble by just, growing in their erosion of underlying structures and so forth. Although there are some types of dermoid cysts that do become malignant, but this is not the case in this instance. And dermoid cyst actually refers to a special type of teratogenic tumor, in which you often find teeth and bone and stuff like that. I don't think that's what this is, from what it sounded like. In any case, to get this thing off the the surface of the brain, off the dural surface of the brain, covering of the brain, they have to do what's called a partial craniectomy, and that's pretty much what it sounds like. What it is you get a rongeur, which is basically a fancy name for a pair of nippers that pinch bone off vertically. You've got a little shelf on the nipper, and you've got the blade, and then the blade comes down, and then you pull that off, and then you slide it up farther, pull that off, and you bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, you get the bone off, the overlying bone off this problem, and you save the bone. You don't throw the bone out. You put it in you wrap it up in gauze and keep it all happy and safe during this. Because what you're going to do at the end of the case is you're going to put that bone back on. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and you wrap up the head and keep everything kind of stable for a while, and eventually, particularly in the young folks, it all sort of goes back together, and it's fine, but it takes a while. It can be very bloody. Well, particularly in a pediatric case, because essentially you have to figure in terms of blood volume. If you got one of these smaller guys, a lot of times you can lose a fair amount. You can lose several blood volume equivalents during one of these cases. Well, that can present some management problems, but if you know what you're doing, you can manage that. And but this is a presumably a benign thing, and they'll get this thing out. Anyway, I got thinking about these kinds of sort of unexpected things that happen in the operating room regarding these how shall we say skin-derived tumors. Let's put it that way. And I've been involved in 2 of these cases. I'll tell you about one of them. This fellow came in with what appeared to be just on his back a fairly large. By fairly large, I mean maybe half the size of a golf ball cyst on his upper back. And typically, the only reason we remove these things is if they become infected and, or painful, or they press on something where if you lay down it causes pain and that sort of thing. And that was the case with this guy. I think he sort of, met all the stuff I just said. Painful and become infected a couple times. And so this general surgeon, who was a very good general surgeon, and I did a lot of his cases, but he was excruciatingly slow. Which from an anesthetics practice standpoint is good, because most of these people were very well medically managed, and they all were fully insured. So, since I bill by the hour, every 15 minutes, that's the way to make a living for me. And, it's boring, but it pays the bills. And so in we go, and, it's one of these cases where, because of the position, you really have to put the guy, well, actually we didn't, we just put the guy in the lateral position, on his side. And Dave's working along, and he gets this thing, and he starts, it turns out this thing isn't just, encapsulated, it's got like a little tail that goes up. Well, I did a lot of neurosurgical anesthesia, in addition to things, and so Dave's kind of, he's got this thing, and he's kind of rolling it up, like you would open up a can of sardines, and it's kind of tugging on things. And I said, Dave, maybe you don't really want to pull on that. Maybe you really want to see where that little stalk goes. Because I was thinking that this thing went down into his spinal canal somehow, and was attached to something really vital down there. You could pith the guy if you pulled too hard on this thing. Well, and Dave, well, he then indeed called out to the lounge to see if there was a neurosurgeon sitting in the lounge waiting to do a case, and there was, fortunately. And this guy comes in, and he looks, and then he goes out, and then he goes out, and he scrubs up, And he says, "This thing's down. This thing's going down into the spinal canal." And so we set up basically for a neurosurgical case in the prone position, which you had to put the guy down, face down, and they had to get in all new sorts of tools and things and so forth. And this guy then sort of did the rest of the case, and it involved doing a partial a unilateral, hemilaminectomy, cervical laminectomy on like 2 levels. I think it was like C2 and C3, and he didn't have to do anything to the skull proper, but this thing was indeed growing off. It was actually a neuroma. This thing had grown off of one of the spinal nerves up there. I think it actually grown off C2. And had Dave just sort of yanked this thing out, he would have killed the guy. No, he'd have killed the guy. But in any case, the case took about 8 hours. And here comes the making a living part of the story. Because you've got to bill for this. Now, the way we billed this for this stuff at that time, and this would have been in the mid-1980s. Well, first of all, you have this little, well, I had, although I'm sure everybody else has too. You have this little thing, it's like a billing card, and you fill it out from the insurance information and admitting information and the patient information and the chart, and you can see, it's got the patient's name, and you've got maybe some contact information, and you've got some insurance numbers if there's any, and then you've got this thing up here that says modifiers. Where's my pen? Where's my pointer? It says modifiers, and and then there's this thing called CPT code. More of that anon. And you fill this out, and that's what I turned into the outfit that did my billing for me, and ultimately collections, but billing primarily. And so it's like, how do you code for this? I mean, because you've got to put in what's called a CPT code. It's like they still have CPT codes, but they have many, many more of them than they did now. Now than they did then. On the other hand, they weren't any too. They weren't any too. They weren't any too sparse in the codes then. This is U.S. This is ICD, ICD, International Classification of Diseases, and 3rd edition. I think they're up to like 7th or 8th now, and this was like again about 30 years. Geez, my word, 30 years ago now, and that said volume 1. Yeah, there's a volume 2 of this bad boy, and that was the simplified case. So there really wasn't any way to code this thing. Yeah. So I flipped through it and I found the closest thing, and it was something like excision of sebaceous cyst or some damn thing, rather than major. So, needless to say, there was a certain amount of trouble getting fully reimbursed for my time. See, what happened is, see, the way you do it in anesthesia, I'm assuming you do it now, the same way now, but maybe not. But at that time, every 15 minutes was a unit. So every hour had 4 units. And you charge by the unit. Now, when I started out, I was charging $12 a unit, or a point, as we called it. $12 a point, $12 a unit. And by the time I finished, well, I started 13 years later. I was charging $41 a point or a unit, and then so you have the time value, and then you also have a procedure value. For example, opening the abdomen is 6 points. A little ditzel or an extremity case that doesn't involve bone is like 3 points. Some of the orthopedic cases are 4 points or 6 points. Like a hip nailing is 6 points. Lower extremity work is more like 4 points. Intracranial, that's 10 points. Intrathoracic is 13 points. If you go on the pump, open heart's 20 points. That sort of thing. Some of the upper abdominal cases are 7 points. So that's sort of the underlying rationale of this. And then I had a series of modifiers because you have modifiers for the physical state of the patient. Class 3 is like mild systemic disease. Class 4 is, and that's an extra point. Class 4 is severe systemic disease. That's 2 extra points. And then, an emergency is an extra point in and of itself. And then certain kinds of invasive monitoring equipment you inserted. Like a central pressure line. Central venous pressure line would be 3 extra points. Arterial line would be 5 extra points. If you did a technique called hypotensive anesthesia, which you didn't often do it, but you would occasionally do it for cerebral aneurysm clippings, that'd be 5 extra points. The positioning, prone was 2 extra points. The lateral was 1 extra point. The sitting position was 3 extra points. Putting him to sleep in the bed and then moving him was an extra point. Their level of obesity could range between 1, 2, and 3 extra points, depending on how heavy they were, or bulky they were, or how difficult they were to shift about, and take care of properly. And then there was massive blood loss, because I did a lot of oncologic surgery where a lot of times I'd replace these folks' blood volumes 1 or 2 or 3 times over. And I would have points for, how many blood volumes I had to, replace and so forth. And then a lot of times these guys would do multiple procedures that you couldn't really code because you're only allowed to code for 1 procedure. So it got a little Byzantine there in terms of the coding. But in any case, here was this, what amounted to an 8-hour neurosurgical case. Certainly, yeah, it was a neurosurgical case. And the insurance company was paying me as if I had, somebody had whacked off a little thing on the arm or something. Well, they thought I was being fraudulent. I wasn't being fraudulent. I mean, it was an 8-hour case. Well, all of this was prompted by this unfortunate child's situation. But these things can be this. This isn't like you've got some sort of medulloblastoma in your brainstem or something. Okay. Yeah, that was fun with the past there for a bit. So on that note, I want to say bye-bye, YouTube.